What's up, everyone? This is the Nuts and Bolts Podcast, and I'm your host, the One James, here with our amazing co-host, Airball.
Hey, guys.
And Michael Kritz is out today on a date with his Embercleave. Don't ask. And we're here to give you the nuts and bolts of the Standard and Pioneer formats each and every week. But first, let me talk to you about the sponsor of this podcast, CoolStuffInc.com. Using code James5, you can save 5% off of anything in the store, sealed products, singles, anything you could ever need in Magic the Gathering and every other card game for that matter. They have it. Go save yourself some hard-earned money and go to CoolStuffInc.com today. Let's go ahead and start with the upkeep. As always, let's talk about the jargon. That is beatdown today. It's a power-packed jargon. There's like 4 different definitions of beatdown. It's one of the most popular terms in early tournament Magic, could mean a variety of things. It's a verb, a couple nouns, an adjective, maybe an arm and a leg too. A verb is to attack with most or all of your creatures every turn without a thought of card advantage until you have put your opponent into range for your endgame hammer, such as Karavek's Torch, Fire Blast, or another direct damage spell like Lightning. I guess Lightning Bolt, you could say, if you're playing Modern. If you're playing another Pioneer, you could, maybe it's a Stomp from a Bone Crusher Giant, or maybe if you're playing Standard, it's a Lightning Strike. But either way, it's often split in the verb form. For example, I beat you down for 5. As a noun, it's used as a description of a card or event, such as Fire Blast was such a beatdown. He was mana screwed and I wrecked him, so the game was a beatdown. Usually I don't use beatdown in the form of that. Usually I say beating. Wouldn't you say, Airball?
Yeah, I mean, I think beatdown is most commonly heard in the context of the all-time great article, Who's the Beatdown? It's more of a role than it is anything else. It's the person who needs to finish the game, because if the game goes on long, then the other player will slowly gain advantage. So mono red against blue white control, mono red is the beatdown, because if the game doesn't end by turn 6 or 7, blue white control will take over the game.
Right. That is the next one, actually, is the player with less inevitability than their opponent and who therefore must attack as much as possible. Failure to recognize, quote-unquote, who's the beatdown is a common fatal mistake for new players, and that's exactly what you said. As an adjective, it ties in with the beatdown principles that we already said. A beatdown deck or a beatdown creature, a creature that's designed to be the beatdown, or a deck's strategy that is designed to be the beatdown. All right, now that we have that out of the way, we're going to talk about some cards that in this episode that are the beatdown. This is the part 2 of the Brothers War set review, and we're going over the colorless cards, or the colorless cards, yes, and artifacts, and also multicolored cards and the rare and mythic lands. We're going to be going over a few honorable mention commons and uncommons, as we didn't go over them in the first one, and let's start out with the honorable mentions today before we get into the other mythic and rare good stuff. Let's start out with a white card called Lay Down Arms. It's a 1 white mana sorcery. Exile target creature with mana value less than or equal to the number of planes you control. Its controller gains 3 life. So this is basically as close to Swords of Plowshares you can probably get. It's not an instant, but it's 1 mana, and your opponent doesn't gain life equal to its power. They always gain 3 life, and it's equal to the number of planes you control, so it has a restriction that's not, and Swords of Plowshares does not have an inscription. It does not have a whatever I was going to say. It doesn't have a restriction, yeah. Not prescription. I don't know what I was saying. Anyway,
it might
have a prescription, actually. Your opponent's creature will have one after you exile it with this card. But this is a very, very powerful card. It doesn't destroy, it exiles, as a lot of white cards do. And I don't know, I guess you're going to be playing a lot of this card in your blue-white control decks.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing that's important about this card is that it doesn't say basic planes. It just says planes. So in older formats, your Hollow Fountains count, your Temple Gardens count, whatever you have. In Standard, there's not really any great duels that have the land types. So your devotion to white has to be super high for this card to work in Standard. But I think there's a pretty good mono-white aggro deck that'll exist, and maybe even a mono-white control deck that will exist that uses this card pretty well.
Also, there's still a couple of them, right? There's Rafine's Tower and Jetmir's Garden. I think those are the only ones that have the only 3 colored ones that have white in it, right? Maybe I'm missing one in Standard.
I think that's right.
Yeah,
so I think that's right. Yeah.
So I know that if you are going to be playing a deck that has white mana and you're planning on playing Lay Down Arms, it might be a good idea to splash in some Jetmir's Gardens and Rafine's Towers in your deck, because they do count as planes for this card. It's not an instant, but it is a very powerful card. Moving on to the next one is Go for the Throat. This is an uncommon. 1 in a black. It's a reprint. It's an instant. It says destroy target non-artifact creature. this doesn't destroy a lot. It destroys a lot of things. It destroys Shieldred. It destroys anything that Infernal Grasp can hit, but just doesn't kill artifact creatures. But you don't lose the 2 life like you do with Infernal Grasp in standard right now. So I think it is better than Infernal Grasp because of how much better it is against aggro decks. But when you do have to use a removal spell on an artifact creature and you have Go for the Throat in your hand, you're like, well, wait, hold on. I forgot that was an artifact, right?
Yeah, it's like Cast Down Syndrome when you forgot that the card you're targeting is a legendary or something like that. It will be a feels bad when that happens, but to be fair, there's not a whole lot of important artifact creatures floating around right now. Maybe that changes after the set comes out, but for now, this is just, I think, the best Doomblade effect that's available all the way back to Pioneer.
Yes, it is. It will be in Rakdos midrange in Pioneer, and I think it will be replacing Heartless Act or replacing Eliminate. If you do want to play this card over those, I think it's better. Also, maybe in place of like 1 copy of Dreadbore. I know Dreadbore does kill anything, and it also kills Planeswalkers, but Dreadbore also is sorcery speed, so it depends on how much you value the instant speed, but Go for the Throat is definitely a card you have to have on your radar, and maybe in standard it means you might want to play more artifact creatures in your decks to play around a card like Go for the Throat. And I've even seen throughout the amount of standard in the new set that I've played, which hasn't been that much, but I have seen Infernal Grasp still in decks because there's a lot of artifacts in standard. So you'll have to think about that. Let's move on to the next one, and it is Monastery Swiftspear. That is it a common or uncommon in this set? I don't even know. It's you can use your wild cards on it. Let's just tell you that it's an uncommon. It is a 1 red for a 1/2 human monk with haste and prowess. That's all it says, but that's all you really need with a card like this to kill your opponent. I've seen turn 1 Monastery Swiftspear attack you for 1, turn 2 play another Swiftspear, and then play Kumano Faces Kakazan, grow both to a 2/3, attack you for 4, hit you for 1 with the Kumano, and then it just goes downhill from there. I've definitely lost on turn 4 in standard right now. Yeah, so it's just gonna kill you. Anyways,
yeah,
sure. It doesn't even really need any like analysis, right? Like it's just Swiftspear.
Yeah, it's a reprint. This card is one of the most powerful cards in the Pioneer mono red deck. Prowess is a super powerful effect, and in standard there just really weren't many great red 1-drops. You had like some decks trying to use Phoenix Chick, but that card is real bad. Monastery Swiftspear is a good way to put pressure on the board and keep pressure on the board with non-creature spells that are good against control decks in mid-range, without having to overcommit to the board into opponents' removal or board wipes. The card is a welcome addition to the format. I don't know that it's going to be enough to make aggro good, but I'm happy to see it.
Yeah, one thing that when we were talking about Go for the Throat, one thing the Go for the Throat can't hit is Rabbit Battery, and they were playing that before they were playing Swiftspear. So now that Swiftspear is a card, Rabbit Battery is not as much of a card. Go for the Throat gets a little bit better, but yes, remarkably better than Phoenix Chick. Unless you can put a whole bunch of 1/1 counters on Phoenix Chick, then it becomes a problem. But anyways, let's move on to the Mythics and Rares. Mythics, starting out with the multicolored creatures. We have Sarenth Great Worm. It's a 6 mana 7/6 for 4 red and a green. It is a worm. It has Trample, so 6 mana 7/6 Trample. Whenever a land enters the battlefield, create a tapped Power Stone token, and that's all the card does. So I've seen people talk about this card in like Commander, but even then, like, do you really want to ramp into your 6-drop and then start playing more lands and making Power Stones? I don't think so. It's like, when are you ever playing this card?
Yeah, I mean, Wizards has shown that they kind of like these mana doubling effects over the last several sets. You had Fires of Invention and you had Wilderness Reclamation. Now, this card, those things are not. But it's, when a land enters the battlefield, you get another mana source. So it's like you get to play 2 land drops every turn. But there are several problems with the card, right? The first is that it just costs 6. So it's an expensive thing to play and doesn't generate a whole lot of value immediately. It generates value over time. And by the time you're playing a 6 mana 7/6, the game really should be ending pretty quick. It's kind of a win more effect, and I don't really like it.
It doesn't even double your mana. It doubles your mana for artifacts and abilities of stuff. So what are you going to do? Unearth with it? What do you have that you want to unearth for like 12? Right?
Yeah, exactly. It's pretty mopey. It's kind of, I think, a way in limited to make the more expensive artifacts, achievable to play, but it's a mythic. It won't even really show up too much in limited either. I don't think this card is great. Maybe in Commander it's fine.
But it's a mythic, so like, what, do they not want to make this rare because it's a 6 mana 7/6 trample is just too good and limited? I mean, maybe.
I think that's exactly right. Yeah, I think this card in limited would be nuts at rare. I think in at mythic it's fine.
And maybe at a rare it would be like a 7/4 or something to be like a little bit easier blockable or easy to remove with a red removal spell or something. But
Yeah.
anyways, I don't want to spend too much more time on this card.
Nah.
All right, let's move on to the next one. And I've played with this before, and it's been pretty sweet. Saheeli Filigree Master, 2 blue and a red for a 4-mana 3 loyalty legendary planeswalker Saheeli. +1, scry 1. You may tap an untapped artifact you control. If you do, draw a card. I like this one. -2, create 2/1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature tokens with flying. They gain haste until end of turn. -4, so you can do this the turn after it comes down. You get an emblem with artifact creatures you control get +1/+1, and artifact spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. So I like this one because you can use cards in standard like Experimental Synthesizer. Not something like you would use this to sacrifice it with a different card like the Synthesizer, but with the Saheeli, you can just tap the Synthesizer every turn and draw a card. You can make the 2/1/1 colorless Thopter artifact tokens with haste, and then you can even tap those to draw a card. You can even tap your power tokens to draw a card. You can just scry 1, but a lot of the time if you're playing Saheeli, it makes the artifacts herself to then draw a card with it. So the +1 is usually always a draw at it, and drawing a card every turn with a 4-mana planeswalker is pretty freaking good. We haven't had a 4-mana planeswalker that draws a card every turn with hardly any downside since Sorin the Mirthless, and that's seen play in Pioneer a lot in Rakdos midrange. So this kind of effect is pretty good. And the emblem is pretty good. That makes you make 2/1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creatures as the -2 that are 2/2s. And if you're playing a deck with quite a bit of artifact creatures, it could be quite a bit of a buff. But what do you think of Saheeli?
Yeah, I think that you're right that a planeswalker that draws a card at 4 mana is usually pretty good. I don't know that it has a great home in the main deck of most standard decks right now. 3 toughness on the planeswalker or 3 loyalty on the planeswalker runs afoul of a lot of the red-based removal that exists. And 1 turn of Saheeli in play is probably not all that great. Where I think Saheeli would shine is in the sideboard against control. So you have like a more aggressive red-blue artifacty kind of Burny or tempo-y build. And then when the control deck brings in its creature-based removal, then you can hit them with the planeswalker. It's kind of like what the sideboard plan is for mono red or Rakdos. You bring in Chandra 4 in Pioneer, or at least you used to make it to play around the control deck's removal.
And even mono red does that in Pioneer, right? They either main deck or bring in some more 3-mana Chandra when your opponent has removal for their creatures. I did want to mention another uncommon because we are mentioning Saheeli, and this uncommon goes very, very well with Saheeli that I was playing with and fiddling around with today. Third Path Iconoclast. It is a 1 blue, 1 red, 2/1 human monk. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, create a 1/1 colorless soldier artifact creature token. So this is Young Pyromancer, but a blue-red creature, and it's the exact same card basically as Young Pyromancer, but the 1/1 colorless soldiers that they make are artifacts and not elementals like Young Pyromancer. So it does turn on your removal spell. The 1 red, deal 4 damage if you sacrifice an artifact. It turns that card on. Those 1/1 colorless soldier artifact creature tokens that you make off Third Path Iconoclast are 2/2s if you have the emblem with Saheeli. Saheeli makes more artifact creatures. Third Path Iconoclast is probably going to be a card that we're going to see played in Standard for sure, and maybe even Pioneer. Like if you played, like there's already a Pioneer deck that is kind of like Izzet Phoenix, but it's like Izzet Pyromancer, so it plays 4 copies of Young Pyromancer. I could see playing 4 Pyromancer and 4 Third Path Iconoclast and really taking advantage of casting your non-creature spells and making a whole bunch of 1/1 tokens. Them being artifacts are very strong, and it works with Saheeli also. So because Third Path Iconoclast exists, I think that opens the door for Saheeli to see even more play if it did see play. All right, moving on to Urza Lord Protector. It's a 3-mana, 2/4 legendary creature, human artificer. Artifact, instant, and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, which is a very strong ability. You've seen an ability like that with the Hadi Djinn, and that card's really good in Standard. You can pay 7 mana if you both own and control Urza Lord Protector and an artifact named the Mightstone and Weakstone, which we'll go over later. Exile them, then meld them into Urza Planeswalker. Activate only as a sorcery. Now, when you have both of those on the battlefield, Pay 7 mana, meld them into Urza Planeswalker. What does Urza Planeswalker do? It's probably the best Planeswalker that ever existed ever, besides like Ugin the Spirit Dragon and maybe like Oko and Red and 6. I'm telling you this. If you're not actually physically watching this, like on a YouTube channel to look at this right now, I'm gonna tell you what this does. The static text is you may activate the loyalty abilities of Urza Planeswalker twice each turn rather than only once. And that's what really puts this into perspective here and what this actually does. There's 5 different abilities of this card. The +2 is artifact, instant, and sorcery spells you cast this turn cost 2 less to cast. You gain 2 life. And you can use that twice in a turn, so your artifacts can be 4 less to cast, artifact, instant, and sorceries. And you can gain 4 life. The +1 is draw 2 cards, then discard a card. You can imagine just drawing 4, discard 2, it's pretty strong. 0 is create 2 1/1 colorless soldier artifact creature tokens. -3 is exile target non-land permanent, and it has 7 loyalty to start with, so you can do this twice and still keep your Urza around. And the -10, you can't do this the turn it comes out, but the next turn you can. Artifacts and planeswalkers you control gain indestructible until end of turn. Destroy all non-land permanents. So, yeah, I mean, yes, it might be like the 5th best planeswalker ever after it flips, but the point is getting it to flip, right? And you need Urza on the battlefield and the Mightstone and Weakstone to meld them. I have seen some streamers, and I'm going to try to do this myself to try to meld them and put it together and try to get this Urza Planeswalker out. But how do you feel about this Planeswalker?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if you flip the Planeswalker, it's a game-swinging action. It probably ends the game almost on the spot. It coming into play with 7 loyalty makes it obscenely difficult to attack him down with creatures, and you get to plus him for 2 twice if you like to get him all the way up to 11. You can exile any arbitrary non-land permanent twice, as you said, so you can catch up from a board state where you're way behind. If there's not much going on, you can draw a bunch of cards, you can make a bunch of soldiers, and the ultimate, of course, is just insane if you can build a board around him too. So the question is, how easy is it going to be to flip Urza reliably? And I think that's going to be very difficult to do. Getting a 3-drop creature to live for any amount of time in Standard is already hard to do. Getting the artifact to live alongside it is also very hard to do. And having to pay the 7 mana and then hope that the opponent doesn't have a removal spell that they waited to cast in order to bait you into spending your mana to flip into Urza. I think this is kind of pie in the sky. I don't think this is going to be very good in Standard, but I know people like you are going to try it.
What do you mean, people like me?
You people. You people.
If anyone would try it, it's you. You're the blue-white control player.
No. I know my limits. This is I don't think this is going to be good enough.
This doesn't quite make the cut for you. I thought this would make the cut.
This kind of gives me Nicol Bolas the Ravager vibes, except
hey, I flipped the Nicol Bolas the Ravager. Harder.
Yeah. I flipped someone else's Nicol Bolas the Ravager once. That did not go as well as I hoped.
Well, you see, there's a reason why we're talking about this flipping Nicol Bolas the Ravager as like a thing that you did once, is because you only get to do it once for however long you play the card.
No, I stole someone's Nicol Bolas the Ravager with like an Agent of Treachery or mass manipulation or something like that, and then I activated him. And it turns out if you do that, he comes back as the Planeswalker, but under his owner's control. Because
it exiled itself.
So, not great.
Oh my gosh, that is not good at all. Your opponent was like, thank you so much.
Yeah. And Scoop.
And Scoop. That's a shame, Scoop, right there, if I've ever seen one. Okay, let's go over to the next one. It's Mishra, claimed by Gix. It is a 2-black-red for a 3/5 Phyrexian Human Artificer. Whenever you attack, each opponent loses X life and you gain X life, where X is the number of attacking creatures. If Mishra, claimed by Gix, and a creature named Phyrexian Dragon Engine, which we'll talk about later, are attacking, and you both own and control them, exile them, then meld them into Mishra, lost to Phyrexia. It enters the battlefield tapped and attacking. Now, the 4-mana, this 4-mana 3/5, if you play this alongside Shieldred in your 4-mana slot, and you have a bunch of other creatures like Tenacious Underdog, and maybe Graveyard Trespasser, and, maybe like a Phyrexian Dragon Engine, and you know, just a couple creatures lying around, and you attack and you play this and attack with your creatures, you're draining for like 2 or 3, which is pretty strong, and it's a 3/5, and we all know from Shieldred 5 toughness is pretty hard to deal with. So I have kind of high hopes for Mishra as just the 4-mana creature by itself. But let's look at the backside. When you meld Mishra into Mishra Lost to Phyrexia, it is a legendary artifact creature, Phyrexian Artificer, so can't get Go for the Throated, interestingly enough. It says, whenever Mishra Lost to Phyrexia enters the battlefield or attacks, choose one. Target opponent discards 2 cards. No, did I say choose one? I meant choose 3. Target opponent
3.
Yeah. Target opponent discards 2 cards. Mishra deals 3 damage to any target. Destroy target artifact or planeswalker. Creatures you control gain menace and trample until end of turn, so all creatures. Creatures you don't control get -1/-1 till end of turn, and create 2 tapped Power Stone tokens. And it's a 9/9 by itself. So you attack with Mishra and Dragon Engine. Mishra claimed by gets triggers, draining them for 2. Turns into Mishra, you get to kill their blocker or all of their blockers if they're 1/1s. Deal 3 damage to their face or to the blocker that's going to block you. Give all of your creatures menace and trample. I mean, how do you not win after you do that? Like, how good do you think this is? And also, how easy do you think it is to meld this?
I think it's still very hard to meld, but I think I have a lot higher hopes for Mishra than I do for Urza, just because I think the individual piece of Mishra claimed by Gix is already a reasonable card to play. It's not great, right? 4 mana for a 3/5, but at least it doesn't need to live for a turn in order for you to get its ability. If you have a board already and you attack with Mishra in play, you're already getting some payoff for having it in play. And you can, and if you ever flip it, then obviously that's just gravy and you win. I think that Mishra has at least a reasonable place in a Rakdos aggro deck, whereas Urza lives in, the memes and dreams of brewers.
You're just not going to give it up.
No, I mean, like, I just want to make sure that people understand, like, that Urza Planeswalker thing is like the flashy face of the set, but you're probably never going to see it. Mishra at least has a chance. Like, be honest with yourself when you're building your decks.
I mean, I have to be honest with you. I flipped Mishra into Mishra Lost to Phyrexia like 8 times already. Like, it just always happens.
I think that is possible to do in the right deck where you're putting pressure on your opponent and they have to tap out, as opposed to something like Urza where they don't. I think it's night and day difference.
Yeah, you'll see when we go over the Phyrexian Dragon Engine and how easy it is to flip the Mishra. All right, let's go over to Legions to Ashes. 1 white and a black sorcery. Exile target non-land permanent and opponent controls, and all tokens that player controls with the same name as that permanent. So your opponent has a lot of Wedding Announcement creatures, and maybe they have 2 Wedding Announcements out. You Legion to Ashes the tokens, and all the tokens die. Similar to a card, it's like an Anguished Unmaking card, right? That it just exiles a non-land permanent, even though this is a sorcery. And maybe it's like there's a card, a 3-mana card that's like a creature. It's a 1/4 and it exiles all the cards with the same name your opponent controls. It's a creature. It's a blue-white creature. I forgot the name of it off the top of my head, but it's kind of similar to that.
Deputy of Detention.
Yeah, it's like a Deputy of Detention, like Legion's End type card, but it's Legions to Ashes. So it kind of gives me Legion's End vibes. What do you think of Legions to Ashes?
So you're right. It definitely reminds me of Legion's End, Declaration in Stone, that kind of effect. But it is 3 mana instead of 2, and I'm not a huge fan of the all tokens restriction. It feels like they could have just made it all permanents with the same name, make it a Maelstrom Pulse for black-white. But maybe that would have just been
that would have been way too good.
As it is, this feels like Vindicate or something. I don't know how many times you're going to have tokens that have the same name as a non-token permanent in most formats. You need some copying shenanigans to happen, and I'm not sure how much of that there's going to be, because traditionally that's not a great effect.
There's like the Esper thing, the instant speed card that can't be countered that destroys an non-land permanent. This is a sorcery.
Voidrend.
Yeah, there's Voidrend. I'm terrible with names. You already know this, but I'm just going to describe the card, and then you tell me what the name of the card.
I can do that.
Yeah,
I'm here for you.
Tell me. You have the Deputy of Detention already. Voidrend. So this is like sorcery speed Voidrend that just exiles all other tokens. So it's like, is some upside to it, but Voidrend's like so much better than this.
Yeah, and I already am not a fan of Voidrend.
Yeah, and Voidrend's still like a kind of subpar card in Standard. I mean, in any format for that matter. I guess outside of Limited. All right, moving on. to Deathbloom Ritualist. It's a 5 mana 3/5 elf warlock. Tap it to add X mana of any one color, where X is the number of creature cards in your graveyard. Okay, this is just like the Great Worm. This upsets me. Like, it's a 5...
Wow, you're offended by this card.
I'm offended. It's a 5 mana card that adds mana. What do you... I mean, 5 mana? That should win you the game. This is a rare. This is no Nissa Who Shakes the World. Like, yeah, it's a 5 mana card that ramps you. Nissa Who Shakes the World. But Nissa Who Shakes the World ramps you into, like, double your mana. Not, like, a couple mana.
Yeah, that's spoken like a true Pioneer player. I do feel like 5 mana is a lot in Standard. I don't feel like 5 mana necessarily needs to win you the game, but by the time you have 5 mana in Standard, other ramp effects are probably not needed so much. And it also takes investment, right? Like, if your opponent's not killing your creatures, or you don't have many creatures, and it's not ramping you very much. So it has a very specific role and very specific deck building restrictions, and I'm not sure you're going to be able to find a fit for it.
It's basically like you're playing Golgari Elves. It's like for Commander, I guess. You're playing Golgari Elves, but you want to ramp into like a big finale of devastation or something. And
Commander makes sense.
Commander makes sense.
Like 5 mana, where 5 mana is not enough to win the game on the spot. And you might actually untap and have uses for the rest of the mana that you generate. I think that's got to be the only place for it.
Yeah, and even then in Historic, you can play, Craterhoof Behemoth with the mana off of this a Deathbloom Ritualist. But there's so many ways to make mana in Elves and Historic, and there's a lot of the same cards in Modern than there is in Historic. So like if you watch or play Modern, you know how much mana Elves can make, and you don't need Deathbloom Ritualist to make that mana for you. So, anyways, I just think it's not that good of a card. I'm not really a big believer of ramping into a card that ramps you. Anyway, let's move on to Cassia Digsite Mentor. It's a Bant 1 and Bant. It's 1 green, white, blue for a 4/3 legendary creature, human artificer. Creatures you control have vigilance, and tap Surveil 1. To Surveil 1, look at the top card of your library. You may put that card into your graveyard. And you can pay 2 and double green, double white, double blue. That's what? 8 mana total? To exile Cassia Digsite Mentor from your graveyard, return any number of target artifact cards with total mana value 10 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Activate only as a sorcery. I mean, for 8 mana, this should not have a total mana value restriction and also a sorcery speed restriction. You should just be able to do this, I think. I don't know, whenever. Yeah. But it does say that...
This is a sick limited card.
Yeah. Sick limited card, but a 4 mana 4/3, like, you play this card and your opponent's Tenacious Underdog blocks this. Like, when your Tenacious Underdog, when their Tenacious Underdog attacks, you cannot block it with your 4-drop. It does give you creatures vigilance and also Surveil 1, which is kind of a cool thing to do. And maybe there's some cool thing you can do with creatures that shouldn't have vigilance and Surveil that you can give the ability to have vigilance and Surveil. But I feel like the ability on this is just magical Dream World Christmas Land.
Yep, it's for board stalls and limited. You might get a little bit of value if you have other graveyard synergies, although in Bant, those are going to be somewhat limited. Yeah, this is just not a constructed card.
Yeah. Let's see. You know what is a constructed card, though? The next one. Hajar Loyal Bodyguard. It is a red and a green for a 3/3? Are you serious? 2 mana 3/3 with upside. You can sacrifice Hajar Loyal Bodyguard. Legendary creatures you control get +1/+0 and gain indestructible till end of turn. It's a human. You can play it in the Jodah 5-color humans deck. It's a 2-drop, which the deck already needed. And it's a 3/3? Hold on, excuse me? And it makes all legendary creatures you control get indestructible? So, I mean, how do you evaluate this card? I mean, I'm just kind of flabbergasted they would actually even print this. Like, I feel like it's too good, but I have not seen it being played yet in Standard because I guess it's only playable in a Bard class legendaries deck, maybe in Pioneer. This will be broken in Bard class, actually, now that I think about it. But also a Jodah standard deck, legendary tribal deck. What do you think?
I've been hurt too many times by Bard class. Every time a new set comes out, I try to make Bard class work, and it just never ever does. it like goes off on turn 2 some amount of the time, and you feel like there's got to be some potential there, and then the other 90% of the time you get hosed. Um, I still think Werewolf Pack Leader is better as far as 2 for 3, as far as 3 for 2, 3 threes for 2 go, because you don't need the commitment to the extra color. I think the Pack Leader's ability is more relevant. But this is a very good aggressive card, and if there is a Gruul aggro deck in the format, then it definitely wants it.
Yeah, and even in a Gruul aggro deck, you can find ways to put legendaries in there, with Halana and Elena being a very powerful card still in standard. And also, just in that 5-color deck I was already talking about, needed a good 2-drop anyway, and this gives your things indestructible. Not to mention, if you have a Ratadrabik on the board, the white-black legendary for 4 mana that says every time one of your legendaries goes to the great dies, you just bring it back as a 2/2. You have that on board. You have Hajar on board. You sacrifice Hajar to give everything indestructible when they go to kill your Ratadrabik, and then this comes back as a 2/2 again to save your board again. It's just funny to me how good this card is. Anyways, moving on to Harbin, Vanguard, Aviator. I did play against this card in the Soldiers deck. Let's talk about it. It's a 1 white, 1 blue, 3/2 human soldier legendary with flying. So 2 mana, 3/2 with flying. Pretty darn good as it is. But also it wins the game. Let me tell you how it does it. Whenever you attack with 5 or more soldiers, creatures you control get +1/+1 and gain flying until end of turn. So this is a alpha strike to heaven and killing your opponent to -50. How do you evaluate Harbin as it's a 2 mana 3/2 flyer as it is with upside?
Yeah, that's pretty good. It's great. Good solid aggressive blue-white flyers card. It's a soldier, so you get payoffs there. The ability is kind of meh to me, because attacking with 5 creatures should probably already be mostly winning you the game, if that's a thing that you're able to do. So not a huge. I'm almost ignoring the ability altogether. But as a 3/2 for 2 flyer, I'm already pretty thrilled with the card.
Yeah, like if the floor of the card is it's a 2 mana 3/2 flying human soldier, which has all of the keywords that you can even imagine staple onto it, right? And it just so happens that if you have 5 creatures or soldiers with this on board, your opponent has to scoop. Like, that's a pretty good upside to me, that they're just gonna die. Because a lot of the ways that blue-white decks like this, a blue-white aggro, even like mono-white aggro, they can't really kill you if they don't have a bunch of flyers. You can live at 1 life pretty easily against these white decks because they don't have a lot of reach like red does. They can just lightning strike you off the top. But these white white aggro decks cannot do that. It makes all of your board flying, so it can kill you out of nowhere. All right, moving on to probably the most popular commander in the set, Tawnos the Toymaker. You shaking your head no, Airball.
Yeah.
Because we just know it's a commander. Like, this is not going to be played anywhere else. It's a 3 and a green blue human artificer legendary. It's a 3/5. Whenever you cast a beast or bird creature spell, you may copy it, exile the copy, or accept the copy is an artifact in addition to its other types. So you cast your Birds of Paradise, it becomes a copied artifact version of Birds of Paradise. I mean, do I have to ask you about this card? Like, are you going to be building this as a commander deck?
No, but I wonder, actually, is there a good mutate creature that's a beast or a bird? I was watching we were just at Magic Summit, and I was watching VeggieWagon, a fellow degen of ours, play a mutate Ivy deck. So Ivy was in play, and all the creatures that had that mutated onto another one could also be mutated onto Ivy.
Oh yeah, because it targets.
I wonder. Yeah, so I wonder if there's a good home for Tawnos, Ivy, and Mutate. That would be kind of fun. Although, I mean, standard, it's garbage. Don't even think about it.
Yeah, don't think about it. But cool commander though. All right, moving on to another card of Urza. Urza, Prince of Krug. It's a 2 white blue 4 mana 2/3. So cast your 4 mana card, get cut down.
Yeah.
Yep. Legendary creature, human artificer. It says artifact creatures you control get +2/+2. You can pay 6 mana to create a token that's a copy of target artifact you control, except it's a 1/1 soldier creature in addition to its other types. And it would be a 3/3, of course, because it gives it +2/+2. Okay, I'll tell you my first evaluation of this card. I've played against this only once and got absolutely destroyed. Yes, I didn't have the cut down, and I was playing cut down. Didn't draw it, but this card, there's a lot of good artifact creatures. There's a 1-mana 1/2 artifact creature that just came out, has protections from multicolored, and you also gain a life every time your opponent plays a non-basic land. And it's already a 1/2 for 1 as an artifact creature. There's still the automaton that has ward 2 that every time an artifact enters the battlefield under your control, it gets +1/+1 counter. That card's still in standard, so there's a lot of really good artifact creatures. The young pyromancer card that we talked about already, the iconoclast, makes 1/1 artifacts. The Saheeli makes artifacts, so there's a lot of artifact creatures that you can get very quickly and go super wide. Slam your Urza, Prince of Krug, down and attack your opponent for a lot. How do you evaluate this card?
Yeah, this card is kind of like a show me card. Obviously, the effect is pretty powerful if you can build a board around it. And artifact creatures are kind of notoriously difficult to evaluate because they might also have other effects beyond just the body. So if you have a good artifact deck that just happens to be good at putting pressure on the board, and Urza is a top end that gets through a ton of damage unexpectedly, then this card could be very good. But at the same time, it's 4 mana. It's only a 2/3. It's not great by itself, and its ability, in terms of ever activating it, forget about it. It's 6 mana. It might as well be a million. So I
But
need
Power
to
Stone
see a deck
tokens.
where.
But Power Stone
But Power
tokens,
Stone
Stairball.
tokens. Yeah. Uh-huh. If this is the best thing you can do with your Power Stone, you know what? You can copy a Power Stone token.
That's even
with this
better.
ability.
That's even better than I thought.
It's utterly broken. Yeah, no, I forget it. This card's awesome.
If you could have 1/1 soldier creature Power Stones.
Yeah, if you can find a good shell for this card, I think is the bottom line. The card will be very good. But if you don't have a lot of support for it, then the card's just going to be kind of ass.
Well, yeah, for sure. But this is more of a synergy card than it is a good card by itself. And usually a lot of artifact decks are synergistic decks. So I'll leave you as an audience to figure this card out. Let us know at Nuts and Bolts Pod on Twitter. Anyway, Mishra, Tamer of Makfawa, new card, 5 mana, 4/4, Human Artificer, legendary. Permanents you control have ward, sacrifice a permanent. Yeah, to target this card and have it resolve, you have to sack a permanent, which includes lands. It also says each artifact card in your graveyard has Unearth for 1, a black, and a red. So you return it to the battlefield for 1 black and a red as an ability, and then it gains haste and it sacrifices itself at the end of the turn. Or it exiles itself at the end of the turn, activate only as a sorcery. So, I mean, you can use this to unearth your big 9 mana artifact from the graveyard if you want to, as 3 mana, which gives you that ability. But like that's probably not going to happen as often as you'd think unless you build a deck around it. But having permanents you control have ward, sacrifice a permanent is a big deal. So it decentivizes your opponent from targeting anything you have, which is really good, especially if you're playing against a very interactive deck like a mono black or a black red mid-range deck in a Pioneer or Standard. I mean, how do you evaluate Mishra, Tamer of Makfawa?
Yeah, there's 2 things about the card that you need to evaluate, right? Like there's how good is the unearth ability, and that will revolve around how easy it is to get busted artifacts into the graveyard and recur them, and how game swinging that can be when you know that artifact is going away end of turn. So I'm not sure about that. There are a lot of big artifacts in the set. I guess we'll have a better idea when we read the rest of those later in the set review. I will say that ward, sacrifice a permanent is not as good as it sounded to me at first, just because game objects in particular are already plentiful, and they are just getting more so with all these cards that create Power Stone shards. So right now you can have blood tokens that you can sacrifice. You can sacrifice lands if you're flooded. You can let Mishra just stay in play as a 5 mana 4/4 as well. I remember like Edgar, people thought Edgar was busted in Standard for a while, but like he is just a 4/4, and you can just let him hit you a few times, and it will not be the end of the world. This card I don't think is going to put enough pressure on the opponent unless its unearth ability is relevant, and I don't think it will be.
There is one card I can think about with this card that the unearth will be relevant, but we'll go over the artifact that I'm thinking about a little bit later on, but it's a 5 mana card. So the earliest you can play this is like play Fable the Mirror Breaker on turn 3. Turn 4, discard the artifact with Fable Mirror Breaker's ability, attack with the 2/2 to make a treasure token, play Mishra, and then next turn unearth it. But your opponent has to just not kill Mishra for you to do that, to be able to do that, or they have to not kill the 2/2 Goblin Shaman token from Fable the Mirror Breaker. And honestly, I think every time I've personally played with this card already, and every time the opponent has been super okay with just killing this and sacrificing a land.
Yeah. Yep, that's pretty much exactly where I am. Sacrificing a permanent is not the end of the world. It seems like it ought to be. Hey, it gets rid of land sometimes, but like only if the opponent wants to sack the land.
Right.
I'm not a huge fan of the card.
All right, moving on to Queen Kayla Bin Krug. It's a 1 and a red white, so 3 mana, 2/3 legendary creature, human noble. You can pay 4 mana and tap it. Discard all the cards in your hand, then draw that many cards. Seems really good, right? Just wait. You may choose an artifact or creature card with mana value 1 you discarded this way, then do the same for artifact or creature cards with mana values 2 and 3. Return those cards to the battlefield, activate only as a sorcery. So, you do have to have a 1-drop, a 2-drop, and a 3-drop, or some combination of... Actually, if you don't have a 1-drop, can you even do the 2 and 3? Does it work like that? I'm not sure. But, basically discard your hand and replay some cards onto the battlefield if you have a 1-drop, 2-drop, and or 3-drop in your hand, right?
Yeah, I don't think you actually need to climb the ladder. I think you get the option for each mana value, whether or not you had the 1-drop and whether or not you had the 2-drop.
Okay. Bottom line is, you have to get this on the board on turn 3. It has to survive, and then you have to play an untapped land and then do this. Is that worth doing? That's the evaluation, right?
Yeah. I think that you have to decide whether the 2/3 has a place in your deck without the ability, because 4 mana to activate something that's card neutral and relies on your graveyard when in a format where Graveyard Trespasser exists is asking a lot. And I kind of don't think we're there, but all I can think about is like Bomat Courier and like Madness decks that want to discard a bunch of cards, and I feel like I really want to try it.
I mean, this card isn't even net neutral in cards, right? It's like pure card advantage. It discards every card in your hand, so you kind of have to work around that. But you draw the same amount. You draw the same amount of cards, and then put the cards on the battlefield. So it's like strict card advantage, right? And it would get around Graveyard Hate, right?
It's not strict card advantage, right? Because if you don't have anything in the graveyard to bring back, then it's card neutral. And you have Graveyard Trespassers in the format that are pretty good at cleaning up the graveyard. Unlicensed Hearse is a card that people play.
Wait, maybe I'm misreading this card. You discard the cards, and then among the cards you discard, you bring them to the battlefield.
Oh, so it's even worse. I thought that it was any card in your graveyard.
No. It's among the cards you discard, so your opponent can only get rid of that at like... Your opponent can't even interact with that, right? Because it's all one ability. Your opponent can't even hearse that.
That is true. You're right about that. I misread that effect.
Right.
Yeah, okay, that's better than I thought.
Right. So it does work around like all the Graveyard Hate. And you do draw that many cards. Say you discard like 3 cards because you have a 3-drop, you untap, you draw a card, you play a land. Say you discard like 3 or 4 cards, and you discard them and you play like 2 of them, maybe one's a 2-drop, one's a 3-drop. And you draw 3 or 4 new cards and have the 2 and the 3-drop on the board. Is that good enough? Like, it seems really good, but it seems like Christmas Flame for that all to happen.
Yeah, it's 7 mana worth of investment when you consider the creature and the ability, and you need to live for a turn. And at the end of the day, you get to draw, let's say, 3 cards, and you get 3, 5, 6 mana worth of value back.
It seems good.
It does seem good. It does die to cut down. It does die to go for the throat. It needs to live for a turn cycle, and the ability is expensive, and it requires you to have 3 artifacts in your hand that you want to put into play. And let's be honest,
artifacts or creatures.
Yeah, and so you're going to need to have a hand that actually affects the board in a meaningful way, which honestly you won't always after you've played your 3-drop. Like turn 4 onward, you might not have the nuts hand to put things into play that you would want to.
Right. So overall, you're just like, you kind of want to try it, but you're kind of like, I don't know if it's going to work out.
For me, this is like in the same way that Urza Prince of Krug was. This is a show me card. I think I have higher hopes for this card than I have for Urza.
All right. Yeah, I can see that.
I really want to see it in a Madness deck in particular.
Oh, for sure. Because you'd be able to discard like instants and sorceries, and then Madness, your 3 damage spell or whatever, and then Madness something else, and then also bring them back.
Yeah.
Yeah, that seems pretty fun.
Like Fiery Temper, this kind of thing, or like Blazing Root Wall would just be insane.
Right. So that seems like a fun thing to do. If anything, it'll be a fun build around. All right. That is it for our mythics and rares for multicolored cards. Let's go ahead and move really quick onto the artifacts. And then we have artifacts and lands, and that's it. We're done. Rootwire Amalgam is a 5 mana, 5/5 artifact creature golem. It's a mythic rare. Has prototype for 1 and a green. And I think this is the first time we're explaining prototype, so I'll explain what it does. You may cast this spell with different mana cost, color, and size. It keeps its abilities and types. So it actually just physically changes the color of the card, which is a really cool thing, especially when in limited, that you can basically use the Rootwire Amalgam in any deck, but if you're playing green, you can happen to use the prototype, which is pretty cool. But this isn't a limited podcast. We're talking about constructed here. How do you evaluate a 1 and a green for a 2/3 that has this ability? 3 and double green. So 5 mana total, sacrifice Rootwire Amalgam, create an XX colorless golem artifact creature token, where X is 3 times Rootwire Amalgam's power. It gains haste until end of turn, activate only as a sorcery. So play this on 2 as a 2/3 in your mono green deck or whatever. And then later on down the line, you can pay 5 mana into this, and you get a 6/6 haste. And that's your 2-drop. But this is a 5 mana 5/5, so you can also cast this for 5 if you want to. And then the very next turn, you can pay 5 mana into this, sacrifice the Amalgam, and create a 15/15 haste. This doesn't have trample, which you would think it does, but it doesn't, so it can get easily chump blocked. So with that said, how do you evaluate this card?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty obvious the home that this deck wants to be in, right? It's a ramp payoff that also you can cast as a 2/3 blocker in the early game to make sure that you don't die. I feel like it only creates one object on the board, and that object dies to most of the removal spells in the format, and the ability is expensive to activate as well. So I'm not like super thrilled with this card, but I definitely see what they were going for. I do like, I will say quickly, the prototype mechanic as a whole. It's a way to get around the Smuggler's Copter issue, where if you have a good enough artifact, then every deck in any color wants to play it. Prototype is a way to encourage devotion to a particular color while still making the artifacts available to any deck that wants just the base creature. So I like Prototype as a matter of design. This card is good. It doesn't excite me too much. Just solid.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's probably a mythic because it's just a bomb in limited. Like 15/15, like this, the 15/15 doesn't actually die or anything. It just like stays on the board. So, and it doesn't actually go for the throated, which is interesting. So you have to have
also true.
It doesn't get go for the throated. It also doesn't get cut down. So the removal spells we're talking is just like, I don't know, just like Wandering Emperor and Infernal Grasp. Like you said, it does die to a lot of things, but like, does it really?
I mean, the 2/3 does. The 2/3 dies to cut down, and let me put it to you this way: if I said I could give you a 10 mana hasty 15/15 that you could pay for in installments, would you think that was a good card?
I mean, paying for it in installments, and you get the 5 mana 5/5 as the first installment. If you're playing mono green, I think I would like that. There's like a lot of 5 mana cards you can play in mono green, which is like Defiler of Vigor or the Silverback Elder of other formats, and those cards are still in mono green. Does this take the spot of one of those cards? Because you can also make the case that you can play. There's a 3 mana card that says all modified creatures you control have trample. So you can also make a case that you can play a couple of those and then modify the Rootwire, giving it a +1/+1 counter from whatever else gives a +1/+1 counter in green, and hit with a 15/15 trample. So there's a lot of things that you could do, but does it take a spot in mono green is my question. And maybe it does, maybe it doesn't, but it is at least a fun thing that you can do and try out, right?
Yeah, for sure.
All right, moving on to a powerhouse, an 8 mana 8/8. Artifact creature construct, colorless, mythic rare, trample. When you cast this spell and whenever Cityscape Leveler attacks, destroy up to one target non-land permanent its controller creates a tapped Power Stone token, and it has Unearth for 8. Okay. In limited, you can just say goodbye to your opponent when you cast this, but it's a cast trigger, which is not an enter the battlefield trigger on purpose because they don't want you just reanimating this and doing that. But it is when you cast it and when it attacks, but it's 8 mana. How are you playing this in Constructed if you are?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably not bad in like a Karn Wishboard or something in Pioneer because it's on a cast trigger and the opponent can't counter it. It's like an uncounterable destroy effect, which probably does have a home in big mana decks like Mono Green and Pioneer. I don't think the Power Stone shard is great compensation for the opponent, so I think that,
It's
that we
not.
can, for all intents and purposes, just call it destroy target permanent. So I think it's like just a better Meteor Golem.
It's a way
Unearth is
better
like,
Meteor Golem.
yeah, it's I think it, and Meteor Golem was already seeing some play in some like Wishboards for Karn as well. The Unearth effect is also kind of nice, although not super important, and just an 8/8 can swing the board.
Yeah, I mean, I've never seen a mono green devotion list not play Meteor Golem. So it getting this card as a strict upgrade, Meteor Golem's a 3/3, ladies and gentlemen. It's a 3/3. This is an 8/8 trample, and it also works when you cast it and when it attacks. You know how many times I've been attacked with a Meteor Golem and it just does nothing but be a 3/3? Like, this card also kills an online permanent when it attacks also. And a tapped Power Stone token is... I don't like that. Like, I think, honestly, giving a tapped Power Stone token is more insulting than giving me nothing.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm like, what the hell am I supposed to do with this garbage? Like, what you're making me do is fish a token out of my box that I don't even want.
And also, you can't even tap it because they have Karn.
That's true too.
That's poetic justice right there. That's so funny. It just makes fun of you, actually, I think. It gives you the Power Stone token that you can't even tap. Anyways, this card is pretty good. We'll be seeing played in Pioneer for sure. Whether it makes its way into Standard, I'm not sure, because 8 mana is a lot. Like, for example, it's a lot to cast 6 mana. To play a 6 mana card like Farewell, it's going to be even harder to play this card, so we'll see what this does in Standard. Maybe you can just unearth it and just put it in your graveyard and unearth it with a bunch of Power Stone tokens you have. You could also do that. We can all... I mean, you can also rent...
Then you don't get the destroy trigger.
Because
unearthing is not casting.
Well, unearth has haste, which means you attack with it and then destroy something.
Sure.
So you can unearth this, actually, because the Mightstone and Weakstone that we're going to go over in a second actually ramps you as an artifact. It's like a Power Stone, but it's a double ramp card. Anyway, we'll get to it. That you can use to unearth this card if you really wanted to. Moving on to the next one, Blade Coil Serpent. I had the pleasure of opening this card in my sealed for my pre-release, and it was bonkers. X and 6 colorless mana for an artifact creature Serpent. It is a mythic. It's a 5/4. When Blade Coil Serpent enters the battlefield, for each double blue spent to cast it, draw a card. When it enters the battlefield, for each double black spent to cast it, each opponent discards a card. And then for each double red spent to cast it, it gets +1/+0 and trample and haste until end of turn. So I cast this for quad black and double red in my Rakdos aggro deck and attack them with a 6/4 haste trample, opponent discards 2 cards card, and instantly won the game.
Yeah.
I mean, in sealed it's going to do that, but what does this do in constructed?
This card's a great top end in any blue-black deck, I think. The red ability is nice. Any deck that's running blue or black, I think, would want this as a top end. I have a love affair with this card. I think this card is outstanding. I don't think it's necessarily going to like dominate Standard. It is very expensive, but it makes my Cold Withered Heart very happy.
Like, is it like this would have in a blue-black control deck? This would have to be better than Hullbreaker Horror.
Oh no, you're insane. That's not true.
Why not?
Hullbreaker Horror being uncounterable is a huge deal.
Oh no, I'm saying
out of the game.
No, you get me wrong. This would have to be better than Hullbreaker Horror to see play, which is why it would not see play. That's what I was saying.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, sorry. I thought you were saying the opposite.
Oh, yeah. No. This card is not better than Hullbreaker. If it was like, where I see this card actually? In like a Sultai ramp deck. That you just like play black because it has good removal, but you're at its core, you're playing a Simic ramp deck. And this
Yeah,
is your
sure,
Hydroid
I can see
Krasis. Right? So you dump like 8 blue mana into this, and then you draw 4 cards. Which is like your Hydroid Krasis that it used to be. Even though Hydroid Krasis was a cast trigger and has flying and all that good stuff, yeah, we know Hydroid Krasis is better than this. But
Yeah, I know it's funny. That made me that actually made me way lower on this card than I was before. Like I know you're like comparing it and saying, "Oh, Hydroid Krasis was great. This is like in the same vein." I'm like, "No, actually, this is much worse than Hydroid Krasis, which is like barely seeing play." So yeah, that kind of crushed the card.
I mean,
for me a little bit.
so you went from loving it to hating it in 1 3-minute segment of the podcast.
I don't hate it, and I love it as a flavor card. It's exactly the kind of card that I love playing. But I think the way you just described it made me feel a lot worse about it.
I mean, you don't have to play it like that. You can play it in your mopey Dimir control deck.
Oh, I will.
You know what? Actually,
not much makes me happier than a mopey Dimir control deck.
Actually, you know what this reminds me of? And you're probably going to get a kick out of this. In Dimir control, you remember like Symbiont something? It was like a 6 mana 3/3 flyer, and it said like when it ETBs, like your opponent discards a card and you draw a card. Like
no, that's before my time.
Symbiosis or whatever. It's just a Dimir like 5 or 6 drop, pretty bad, but it just draws a card and makes your opponent discard a card. That's what this is going to do in your Mopo Dimir control deck. Maybe it makes you draw 2 cards or make your opponent discard 2 cards, but it's kind of like that, and that card wasn't good.
Yeah.
It seems like you know that already, but you're just like, you want to play it anyway?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I know better, but it's not going to stop me.
You know better, Airball. I'm probably going to be building this card in a Simic Ramp deck, and it's going to be great. All right, moving on to the next one, Platoon Dispenser. This is a super fun card. It's a 5 mana artifact creature construct. It's a 4/6. At the beginning of your end step, if you control 2 or more other creatures, draw a card. Pay 3 and a white, create a 1/1 colorless soldier artifact creature token, and then you can unearth this for 2 and 2 white. So this is a token factory that if you do control more than 1 token or more than 2 creatures, or 2 or more other creatures, draw a card. So you know what? I don't like this card now that I just said that. You know why?
Yeah.
It reminds me of the Mopey artifact or enchantment that says gain 2 life and draw a card if your life is more than your starting life total. Like, what is that card?
Yep. That's exactly. I don't know how you and I came to the same thing there, but like investing a ton of mana to get a single token. Yeah, that's exactly where I was going with it. This card is bad.
What was that card called again?
Dawn of Hope.
Yeah, well, it's not even just Dawn of Hope. It's Dawn of Hope, which this does remind me of, since it has that like white artifact flavor to it. But there's also another one. There's a 3 they nerfed it in Alchemy. It was it made it like scry 1 and then draw a card if your life total was higher than your starting life total, and it like you gained 2 life at your end step. It was just like a really bad like 3 mana artifact. Anyway, it's a lot of mana for something that like doesn't really do much, but like maybe it's too good for limited, which is why they made it a mythic. But this is a mythic rare Airball. Think about that.
Yeah, it's a mythic rare because it's so good and limited. Having 2 or more creatures live is not a hard thing to achieve in limited. And you have and 4 mana for a 1/1 token is like not enough to make you cry in limited like it is in constructed. So like the card is quite good there, but I can't see a constructed application for it.
Yeah, me neither. I mean, it does have unearth for 4, but like, why would you want to like haste this and have it get exiled and make like a single 1/1? I can't even.
What the hell is that?
I can't even say this seriously. And it's all
4/6, I guess.
It also doesn't like make a colorless. Even if it made a colorless soldier artifact creature token for free at the end step, it would still be bad. You have to pay 4 mana to do that.
Yeah.
Originally, I thought
this does scream. This does scream like it will get buffed in Alchemy in like a month.
yeah, it's gonna get buffed in Alchemy to make the 1/1 for free and still see no play. All right, let's move on to Liberator, Urza's Battlethopter. This card actually I think is pretty good for those artifact creature decks we were thinking about. 3 mana, 1/2. You think that's bad, but wait to the rest. Legendary artifact creature Thopter. It has flash and flying. You may cast colorless spells and artifact spells as though they had flash. Whenever you cast a spell, if the amount of mana spent to cast that spell is greater than Liberator Urza's Battlethopter's power, put a +1/+1 counter on Liberator. So you flash this in, you go to your turn, you play a land, and you pass. Who doesn't want to? Who doesn't love doing that? Right? Just play a land and draw go, with Urza's Battlethopter on the board. And then you play a 2-drop with Flash, and you get a +1/+1 counter on Liberator. Then you play a 3-drop, you get another +1/+1 counter. And then you can kind of like tempo your way with the Liberator into casting everything with Flash. What do you think about this?
Yeah, this kind of reminds me of the old Wrath Capuchin card from Dominaria. And
I played with
remember
that.
card that card saw play in the 5-color Niv decks because you would flash in on turn 4 Wrath on your opponent's end step, and if they countered it, then they were tapped out and you could resolve Niv. And if they didn't counter it, then you just said go
Yeah.
and waited until their turn and tried to resolve Niv on their end step. And it was this huge tempo swingy card. And at the same time, the fact that this is a 1/2 that grows in decks that want to spend big mana like Artifact decks tend to do, I think that's pretty good, honestly. So, like, imagine what 4-drop colorless cards, what 4-drop colorless cards do we talk about a lot, James, that we think might
Karn,
benefit
baby,
from this kind of
Karn.
ability? Yeah. So imagine flashing this in on your opponent's end step, and they're in that Wrath Capuchin spot where they know a Karn is coming down. And it's going to grow this Thopter if you're even allowed to cast it and start putting pressure on the opponent.
Yeah, so I mean, it's not just that, right? Like, there's a lot. You can flash this on turn 3, and then on turn 4 you play an untap land and pass, and your opponent does their turn like normal, and then you flash in a Reckoner Bankbuster, and then
Sure.
on 4 mana, and then your Liberator gets a +1/+1 counter. Now it's a 2/3 flyer, and then you get to use the Reckoner Bankbuster in the same turn, drawing a card, and then you draw for turn, and then play a land and say go again. like it just puts your opponent in weird spots, and it makes them like kind of have to kill Liberator at all costs, or else it's going to kill you. I think this is a really cool build around, and I will be building around this, and it seems really cool.
It's a legend, which does suck a lot because this is the kind of card that you would want to be a 4 of in the kind of strategy that I'm describing. But I think it's still pretty strong.
Yeah, for sure. All right, let's go with the next one, which is the Stasis Coffin. Is it as scary as Stasis? I don't know. We'll see. It's a 3-mana legendary artifact. You can pay 2 and tap it, exile the Stasis Coffin. You gain protection from everything until your next turn. All right, what is up with artifacts that you can get from Karn Great Creator that exile themselves? Like, why do they all exile themselves?
To piss me off, basically. To remind me that they should have eroded Karn a long time ago, to not be able to fetch things that were exiled, but they didn't and they won't, and it makes me sad.
It's like they want to ban Karn or something. I don't know. Like, they make everything exile. Anyways, it gives you protection from everything. So good luck, opponents attacking you, because that's never going to happen. But what do we think about Stasis Coffin in another format like Standard?
I think it's probably bad. It's 5 mana to 1 turn for 1 turn protect you from, say, damage from a creature or whatever. So you're time walking yourself to buy yourself another turn later in the game, and that doesn't really feel so great against any deck that isn't just trying to kill you outright with damage. Blue-white control laughs in your face if you're playing this deck. In fact, I think most decks do. So I'm not a huge fan of this card in Standard.
It's like protection from everything just means like you fog a turn, I guess.
Yeah.
All right.
It's a 5 mana fog.
I agree. I don't think
you
it's
can
that
recur
good.
with Karn.
Like, I don't think it's that good unless you're just recycling it every turn with Karn, and
Yes.
we all know how we feel about that.
Yes.
All right, moving on to Portal to Phyrexia. Now, this is the card I was talking about that you can bring back with the Mishra from the graveyard to unearth for 1, a black, and a red. Portal to Phyrexia is a 9-mana artifact. It's a mythic. When Portal to Phyrexia enters the battlefield, each opponent sacrifices 3 creatures. At the beginning of your upkeep, put target creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control, so it includes opponents' graveyards. It's a Phyrexian in addition to its other types. So, you can discard this card to Fable the Mirrorbreaker, attack with your 2/2 Goblin Shaman, make a treasure token, play an untap land, cast the Mishra, and then next turn, bring back Portal to Phyrexia from your graveyard with Unearth for 3 mana, and make your opponent sacrifice all their creatures. You won't get the beginning of your upkeep trigger because it will exile itself at the end of the turn, but you will get to, make your opponent sacrifice the creatures. There's another deck that I think that I've played this in and that's very good as well, but a way that you can cheat it out of the graveyard as well. But how do you evaluate this card? In, I mean, I guess you're never getting to. I guess you could get into 9 mana in limited, but how are you doing this in constructed?
Yeah, I think that you're probably not. 9 mana is like cheated into play, or it's not, or it's never going to happen territory. There's a reason Omniscience costs 10. It's like that's just an amount of mana that's just not reasonable to ever cast in any constructed format. So I think the question is, can you cheat it into play profitably, reliably? So like that Mishra card that we were looking at earlier that gave artifacts in your graveyard unearth. You can get a portal to Phyrexia for 1 turn, which is obviously really, really good some of the time, but not even all of the time, right? If your opponent doesn't have many creatures in play, or you don't have anything appealing to reanimate with portal to Phyrexia in play, the card isn't that great if it gets unearthed. And also, Mishra is like one of the only good ways to cheat the artifact into play anyway. So without Mishra, this card just sits dead in your hand and you're very sad. So I think it's just like a much, much, much worse Godpharaoh's Gift in a way.
I think there's a card you're not thinking of with this.
Maybe.
There's a 5 mana reanimate card that doesn't reanimate creatures in standard. And I think it's either in this set or in a past set. I think it's in this set. But it's I think it's an uncommon. But it's 5 mana, 3 and double white, I believe. And it says return an artifact, enchantment, or something else from your or planeswalker, I think, from your graveyard to the battlefield. And that's all the card says. And I think you actually make a Power Stone token. Yeah, it's in standard. It's 5 mana, and I think you make a Power Stone token also. Not that it matters, but not that that matters. But I did play a deck already that discarded this card with Fable the Mirror Breaker, or maybe you can even use the 2 mana blue white card that draws 2 and discards 2, the Faithful Mending. You play a lot of cards like that in a deck like this. There's even a card that draws 3 cards and discards a basic land. And if you don't discard a basic land, you discard 2 cards instead. You can also play that. Oh wait, there's also the one that you discard an artifact instead of discarding 2 cards. So there's a discard shenanigans thing you can do with this, and then you can attack with your Fable the Mirror Breaker token, make a treasure token, play your untap land, and play the 5 mana reanimate card on Portal to Phyrexia. The cool thing about that is that unlike the unearth ability, this stays on the battlefield to your next upkeep to return a creature to the battlefield. So that is the best way I've seen to cheat this out, and that's something that I've already played, and it's really, really good.
Yeah, I would love to see like how this card works with Refurbish in Historic.
Oh, for sure.
That would be cool. But I don't know the card you're talking about in Standard. If it exists, then maybe.
Oh, it exists.
Maybe there's hope for this card. Great.
Yep. All right, moving on to Urza Silex. Newsflash: this also exiles itself. Anyway,
Great.
It's a legendary artifact. You can pay 2 and double white, so 4 mana, and tap it and exile Urza Silex. Each player chooses 6 lands they control. Destroy all other permanents. Activate only as a sorcery. When Urza Silex is put into exile from the battlefield, you may pay 2 colorless mana. If you do, search your library for a Planeswalker card, reveal it, put it in your hand, then shuffle. That seems pretty good, but it does take white mana to use it. So how do you evaluate Urza Silex?
Bad. Like, I feel like 7 mana board wipe is kind of unplayable. And I also feel like the ability to fetch a Planeswalker card from the deck is probably not super relevant most of the time either. Like, imagine taking 2 turns to rat the board. It's kind of the same problem that Karn's Silex has, where the opponent sees it coming face up and can play around it forever.
Yeah, that's true. But with Power Stones, this doesn't come in tapped, so you can play it and use it in the same turn, unlike Karn Silex, which I think gives Urza Silex a little bit more of an upside. So it is 7 mana, but it destroys all other permanents besides 6 lands on either battlefield, which is a better effect, I think, than Karn Silex.
I think, yes, it is definitely better than Karn Silex, but like it's kind of like a Cleansing Nova or Farewell kind of effect, and Farewell is even cheaper, honestly, than Urza Silex and does more. This hits Planeswalkers, I guess, so maybe it comes in against Planeswalker heavy builds. I don't know, this card just feels mopey to me.
So what you do is you use this, pay 2, and then search Karn, and then get it back out of exile.
Sure, in Pioneer, sure, yeah. Like obviously, all of these cards are so much better with Karn that it's ridiculous. But in Standard or something, I don't feel like it's great.
All right, moving on to the next one. 7 mana, 4/3, Arcane Proxy. Wizards makes proxies now into real cards, confirmed. All right, it's an artifact creature wizard. It has prototype for 1 blue for a 2/1. When Arcane Proxy enters the battlefield, if you cast it, exile target instant or sorcery card with mana value less than or equal to Arcane Proxy's power from your graveyard. Copy that card. You may cast the copy without paying its mana cost. So it's like an artifact version of Snapcaster Mage, but that doesn't have flash, but it's 3 mana to do that for the 1 blue 2/1 side of it, and you can only use it to cast a 2 mana or less instant or sorcery without paying its mana cost. But if you do get it on the battlefield and you cast it for 7 mana as the 4/3, you can flash back a 4-drop. So I don't know how relevant this is going to be in Standard. I don't know if you're ramping into this card, if you're just playing it in blue decks, but how do you evaluate Arcane Proxy at face value?
I think the card is pretty reasonable. I am like super into casting it and flashing back like Expressive Iteration, if that's something that's possible in a format where that's still legal.
I guess Modern.
Yeah, I guess. But Modern is like so far above my pay grade that I don't know. I feel like a 2/1 for 1 Snapcaster. I guess you could flash back like a removal spell, like if we're talking about Mopey Dimir decks again.
Oh my god.
Go
for the throat.
Yeah, sure. I don't think you're ever casting the 4/3 for 7 and feeling happy about it, right?
No, like the only time you're ever doing this is in your green blue ramp deck.
And you're flashing back Growth Spiral, I guess.
No, not Growth Spiral. I'm talking about in Standard when you're playing the Blade Coil Serpent to be your Hydroid Krasis. You can also use your Arcane Proxy to flash back your, I don't know, Whelming Wave.
Oh, you know what you can do? You can flash back See the Truth. And
like get 3 cards off of it?
Draw 3. Yeah.
That's true.
Maybe that's the play.
Because you're not casting that from your hand. That's cool. Okay, there's like different things you can do with Arcane Proxy that are cool. Whether or not it's good or not, or mythic worthy, is another question, I think.
Yeah.
All right, moving on to Clay Champion. I've seen this card be huge, by the way. It's X and 4 for a 2/2 artifact creature construct. Clay Champion enters the battlefield with 3+1/+1 counters on it for each green spent to cast it. When Clay Champion enters the battlefield, choose up to 2 other target creatures you control. For each white spent to cast Clay Champion, put a +1/+1 counter on each of them. I've seen Clay Champion come down as like a 4 mana 6/6, I think it is. Right? Put 3 +1/+1 counters for each double green, so 3, 6. No, it's an 8/8.
Yeah,
if you cast it for 4 green mana, it's an 8/8. So 4 mana 8/8 in your mono green deck. But if you played it in a green-white deck and say you went like double green, double white for it at 4 mana, it's a 4 mana 5/5 that puts +1/+1 counters on each of up to 2 creatures you control.
Yeah, I remember sitting there doing the math when I saw this card was spoiled, and I thought that can't be right. I must be doing this wrong. This is just an absurd amount of power on this card. That said, like I feel like this is very good, and I think it will definitely see play. But I also kind of felt the same way about that card from Strixhaven that gave you a token that was like the size of the number of cards in your library, and that just never really saw play at all either. So what do I know?
Right. I feel like Wizards is doing this thing where it's like, how big do we need a creature to be playable with no keywords?
Yeah, exactly.
And 4 mana 8/8 is where we are now.
Yeah, and it might still not make the cut, honestly. I could see it like in a Gruul deck where you have something to give it haste, like a Reckless Stormseeker or something. When you have that in play, and then you have just an 8/8 that gets haste when it comes down the next turn, that would be pretty nuts.
Well, you do have to have a weird mana base to make that work, right? Because you have to pay quad green in your Gruul deck to play this as an 8/8.
So you would need to have you'd need to have good duels available to do that.
Which I guess we have Karplusan Forest, but like that's it in Standard right now, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you just cast it for 2 green and 2 red, then it's still a 5/5 haste for 4 with the Reckless Stormseeker.
Yeah, 6/5 with Reckless Stormseeker, right?
State. Yeah, that's right. Yep. So I don't think that's too bad. I think it's a pretty good aggressive card.
I don't know. We'll see. And it does come with counters on it, so it does make it does mean that it's modified which means it would have trample if you have Kodama on the board. Kodama of the East Tree, I believe it is.
Mm-hmm.
So
And the Thundering Raiju as well also gets pings off of it being modified.
right. So we'll see. Maybe there's something to that card. Anyways, moving on to the next mythic rare, Skitterbeam Battalion. 9 mana. Oh my gosh, what's up with everything being 9 mana? 9 mana, 4/4. It has prototype for 3 and double red, so it's a 5 mana 2/2 for the prototype. As a 9 mana card, it's a 4/4. Trample and haste. When Skitterbeam Battalion enters the battlefield, if you cast it, create 2 tokens that are copies of it. So let's say you use the prototype and it's a 5 mana 2/2, then you get 3 red 5 mana 2/2s on the board. So 5 mana for 6/6 in total power and toughness with trample and haste. That kind of reminds me of Burn Down the House, to be honest. Like just making the devils. That's what the 5 mana thing like feels like to me, without the ability to deal 5 to everything. But like the 9 mana part of it is like never gonna happen, right?
Yeah, 9 mana is never going to happen, and I think the 5 mana is kind of mopey as well. Like, 5 mana and you get 3 2/2s.
Like, that feels not good enough, right?
I mean, yeah. I
mean,
2/2s just so often get stuffed by whatever's in standard right
I mean, if you're
now.
playing
There
like
are a lot of big booties around.
Yeah, I mean, but if you're playing like a Jeskai artifact creatures deck and you're playing the blue-white artifact creature thing that gives everything +2/+2, and turn 4 you play the artifact creature thing, and then turn 5 you do this, and then now you have 3 4/4 haste tramples because it gives everything +2/+2.
Yeah, one
That's
nice
good.
thing, like this card's job is like not to be a mid-rangey threat, right? This card's job, I think, is the top end of an aggro deck
And kill you.
that right, that so you've put enough pressure on your opponent, you've successfully gotten them to tap out for a board wipe, and now you get 6 hasty damage out of nowhere across 3 permanents that basically forces them to wipe the board again or they're done. I think that's the job of this card. Whether that has a home in standard or not, I guess we're gonna have to see. But I don't think it has any role as a 9 mana creature. I think if the deck that wants this casts it for 9, then it's very sad.
And I think if you're doing that top end kill you thing, I think turn 4 is where you want to do that right now, especially with Monastery's Footspear in the format and you wanting to actually play like 22, 21, 20 lands in your deck. You're never getting to 5. Like, Thundering Raiju is probably your top end anyway, and that's 4 mana, and a lot of the times you're going to have that in your hand while you kill your opponent anyway and not able to cast your 4-drop. So,
sometimes you'll hit 5, right? Like we've all played those aggro decks and flooded out. Like, sometimes you will get to 5.
Yeah, but it's not something you'll do every game and not something that you're like counting on with Skitterbeam Battalion in your deck. All right, moving on to a very powerful one, Phyrexian Fleshgorger. It's a 7 mana 7/5 Phyrexian Worm artifact creature. It has prototype for 1 and a black and another black, so 3 total mana for a 3/3 Menace lifelink with ward, pay life equal to Phyrexian Fleshgorger's power. So this card has been interesting in mono black decks and red black mid-range and aggro decks in standard over the past couple days that I've been playing on Arena. And just as a 3 mana 3/3 with Menace and lifelink that has ward, pay 3 life is still pretty good on rate. But what if you have this as a 7 mana 7/5 ward, pay 7 life? How do you evaluate this card?
I think the card is pretty solid in a mono black aggro deck. Menace and lifelink are 2 pretty relevant abilities against other creature decks. Ward effectively gives it haste if the opponent hits it with targeted removal. I don't really think you're ever going to play it for 7, but the just the prototype ability alone makes it pretty good.
Yeah, one thing we haven't mentioned yet is that these prototype cards, you can blink them and it comes back on their non-prototype side. If you blink them or reanimate them, it does come back for the non-prototype side, so that's pretty good. Anyways, let's move on to Surge Engine. It's a 2 mana 3/2 artifact creature construct with Defender. It has 1 blue, Surge Engine loses Defender and gains this creature can't be blocked. And then you can pay 2 and a blue to have it become blue and has base power and toughness 5/4. Activate only if Surge Engine doesn't have Defender. Then you can pay 4 blue for 6 mana to draw 3 cards. Activate only if Surge Engine is blue and only once. I've seen a couple content creators playing with this card. I feel like I'm a believer and I'm not a believer at the same time with this. It's like, I don't know. When it gets to the point where it's a 5/4 and can't be blocked, it's super scary. But like, are you ever drawing cards off of this?
Yeah, this kind of feels like Ascendant Spirit, right? Like this staircase pattern where you have your build your own Voltron in one card kind of thing. But it's always massively disappointing because the activated ability is so expensive and it feels like such a blowout when it gets killed in response. So that does kind of suck. Also, it's like this kind of card would be pretty good with the original defender ability if it had a big butt that would keep you alive and then eventually you take over the game, but it doesn't. Like 3-2 is not a stat line that's really going to affect the game by the time the card becomes relevant. And like 4 mana to turn it into a 5/4 in addition to the 2 you paid to begin with, meh.
Yeah,
I don't love this card.
the only time I see this thing play is in like a mono blue tempo deck. But does this really replace like the one drop, the one mana 1/1 that turns into the aberration, the 3/2, the super popular card that I also forgot the name of off the top of my head? I need to have like more
Delver of
coffee or something
Secrets?
because I'm forgetting iconic cards now.
Delver of Secrets
Yes.
is the card you're thinking
Am
of.
I
Yeah.
canceled from podcasts now that I forgot Delver of Secrets?
Yeah, you're fired. I'll take it from here.
All right, go ahead. All right, see ya.
You go play with Michael's sword.
All right. I mean, I need more coffee, I guess. I don't know, but I it's like, are you replacing that card? Like, you're not replacing Hottie Jin? So like,
I think you're right that this is a tempo card. I just don't think that it's a very good tempo card. So I'm not a huge fan.
Okay. All right, moving on to Autonomous Assembler. It's a 5-mana 4/5 with prototype for 1 and a white for a 2/2. It has Vigilance. You can pay 1 and tap it to put a +1/+1 counter on target assembly worker you control. Are we talking assembly worker tribal here?
Boo. This card stinks.
At least this doesn't have Unearth for 4. What is wrong with this card?
2/2 Vigilance for 2. Magic as Richard Garfield intended. Holy crap.
Okay.
If you didn't have to tap to put a counter on something, then sure. But no, this card is abysmal.
Like you're never casting it as a 5-mana 4/5. Like this is a 2-mana 2/2 in white for Vigilance. 2-mana 2/2 Vigilance, which is like not that bad. But when you take into consideration that in standard right now we have a 2-mana 2/3 lifelink with another ability that also doesn't see play. So when you consider that, this card will not see play. I mean, it's also not a soldier, so like, what are you even going to do? You have Thalia, Guardian of Thraben, for crying out loud. You're not going to play Autonomous Assembler for a 2-mana 2/2 Vigilance.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's it. That's all we're going to talk about that card. All right, moving on to Razorlash Transmigrant. It's a 2-mana 3/1 artifact creature zombie. Razorlash Transmigrant can't block. You can pay 4 black, so 6 mana total, to return Razorlash Transmigrant from your graveyard to the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it. This ability costs 4 less to activate if an opponent controls 4 or more non-basic lands. So better in best of 3 than best of 1, that's for sure, because best of 1 has a lot of mono black, mono white, mono red, mono blue, mono green, and 2-color decks. But in best of 3, you can get away with it because there's a lot of mid-range decks and nobody plays any basic lands. This, you know what this reminds me of? Scrap Heap Scrounger.
Scrap Heap Scrounger. Yep.
That it costs 2 mana at instant speed to return from the graveyard to the battlefield. This gets a +1/+1 counter on it, so it becomes a 4/2, which is pretty good. And it's a 2-mana artifact creature, just like the other card, and it can't block, just like the other one. And I remembered the name of that, by the way, because I played with Scrap Heap Scrounger.
Yeah, I love Scrap Heap Scrounger.
So do you love this card like just like Scrap Heap Scrounger, or is this like too cheeky of a 6-mana ability to do?
So I think it comes down obviously a lot to how often your opponent's going to have 4 or more non-basic lands, and I think that will happen a lot more as standard grows, right? So like we have a 2-set standard at the moment, or at least we will once Brothers War comes out, or like a 5. This is the 6th set, right? By the time you have 8, it's a lot easier to build mana bases that have a lot of non-basics in them. So I think that this card gets better the closer we get to the next rotation, and then it'll get worse again. I think that in a format where that exists, obviously this is just a better Scrap Heap Scrounger. It has one less toughness, but you don't have to exile a creature card from your graveyard to activate the ability. I'm a pretty big fan of this card. I really want to see what it can do.
Like the fact that it's an artifact creature is good because you have a lot of artifact creature synergies, and the fact that it's a zombie is also good because we do have the champion, the black 1-drop zombie champion. What's the card called again?
Champion of the Parish.
Yeah,
Champion of the
thank you,
Parish. Yep.
Hairball. My card name
I got you.
specialist. Thank you so much. Champion of the Parish is still in standard, by the way. Can you believe it?
I can't actually. That's surprising.
Yeah, but no one plays it because there's not a lot of good zombies. But does this make a zombie deck better?
It makes it better, obviously. I don't think it makes it good.
I mean, it's a pretty good freaking zombie, though.
Yeah, just not in standard. There's still not enough support. This will not by itself, put the team on his back though and make zombies playable.
I'll play it. I'll show you.
Okay.
Okay, moving on to the next one. It's a green card with Unearth. It's a Perennial Behemoth, 5 mana, 2/7. Excuse me? 5 mana, 2/7. Artifact Creature Beast. Okay, this goes in our Bird Beast deck now. You may play lands. Great. You may play lands from your graveyard. Okay. I mean, we already have like Soul of Windgrace in standard, but sure. It has Unearth for double green. So 2 mana, 2/7 if it hits your graveyard to bring it back. Return it to the battlefield, it gains haste, exile it? Like, why are you ever wanting to give your Perennial Behemoth haste as a 2-power creature? I guess you can play another land from your graveyard. Let's freaking go. Like, why is this a rare? I don't know. It has 7 toughness, I guess. How do you evaluate this card?
The way I read this card is there is some busted Crucible of Worlds combo in some older format where you could just go infinite with like Fields of Ruin and Stone Rain your opponent to death while keeping this in play for a turn. I don't really know why you would ever unearth this card in any other context unless it did something bonkers on the turn it came into play. So that's the only thing I can think of.
Yeah, I can't think of anything, actually. That's way more than I would have thought of. All right, that's probably not playable. All right, moving on to Steel Seraph. It's a 6 mana 5/4 flyer with prototype for 1 white, just like Adeline. It's a 3/3. At the beginning of combat on your turn, target creature you control gains your choice of Flying, Vigilance, or Lifelink until end of turn. This card, I think, is one of the best prototype cards in all of the prototype cards. I have gotten hit by a humongous flyer that should never be a flyer because this card was on the board. It's also an artifact creature. It also has flying itself, so you can make something else flying, so you can get in for a lot of damage. And I think it just has a lot of synergies in standard with the artifact creatures and the prototype, and being white and being a 3/3 as it is for 3. I think there's a lot of applications you can do with this. Flying, Vigilance, and Lifelink are 3 really relevant keywords.
Yep. I think it's a very, very good card. I think it'll definitely see play in the mono white aggro decks. It's also like randomly an angel as well.
Yeah, I didn't even notice that until right now.
Yeah, so like I think that also plays well in the angels archetypes where they exist.
All right, moving on to Simian Simulacrum. It's a 3 mana 2/1. It's an artifact creature ape. Why is this? I guess monkeys are different from apes, so shout out to WotC for distinguishing between apes and monkeys. When Simian Simulacrum enters the battlefield, put 2+1/+1 counters on target creature you control. As Unearth for 2 green. So you can put 2+1/+1 counters on target creature, so not on multiple creatures, just one. Then you can unearth it again as a 2/1 haste, and then you can put counters on itself and get in for damage. So, I mean, it's a rare, it's 3 mana. But a 3 mana 2/1 that you can put 2/1 counters on itself, because it doesn't say another creature, which means it technically is like a 3 mana 4/3 on rate, and 3 mana 4/3s have been pretty good. Look at Bonecrusher Giant, but this is no Bonecrusher Giant. How do you evaluate Simian Simulacrum?
It's a good, solid, above rate card. Obviously, you're pack one, pick oneing this in limited almost every time. I just don't feel like it makes the cut at the 3-drop slot for like the mono green deck, which is where you would probably want it if you're going to use the Unearth ability. I think there's just a lot better 3-drops in the aggressive green based decks than this card.
Yeah, the 3-drop slot's super clogged. you have just a bunch of cards that you can play that are all better than this. All right, Moving on to Teresian Mindbreaker. It's a 7 mana artifact creature Juggernaut. It's a 6/4. Whenever Teresian Mindbreaker attacks, defending player mills half their library around it up. Whenever it attacks. It also has Unearth for 1 and triple blue. So take it out of your graveyard for 1 and triple blue, attack with it because it gains haste because it has Unearth, and then just mill half your opponent's library. The one problem I have with mill in standard right now is that everything in standard, all the powerful cards at least, have mill half their library. So all the powerful cards just say mill half. If all of them say mill half and your opponent's at 4 cards left in the library, you're going to mill them 2 cards and never kill them. So, I mean, how do you evaluate a card like this?
Yeah, you've got the Xenos paradox problem where the more often you do it, the less effective it becomes.
Exactly.
And also, if you're casting this for 7, then they've probably already gone through a pretty good chunk of their deck, so this card is not as inspiring as it might otherwise have been. I don't think this card has a home anywhere.
I mean, I was trying to build a Grixis mill deck with Lord Xander, and that mills your opponent's library half as well. There's also a card called, I don't know card names, but it's a 6 mana card from New Capenna, and it has Casualty, and you can mill your opponent half your opponent's library, and then Casualty to mill half more of their library, but you're just never going to kill them because you keep milling half.
Yeah, I don't know the name of that.
Cut your losses. There we go. My brain is working.
Sure, I'll take your word for it.
Yeah. So keep milling your opponent in half. See how that goes. I guess it only works if your opponent has exactly like 0 or 1 card left in their library, then they lose.
Yeah.
Cool.
Great.
All right. Moving on to a spider. Thran Spider is a rare. I always like rare spiders because like all the spiders that are like in limited are like 5 mana 3/4 or 5 mana 3/5 reach, and that's it. So I always like the additional abilities that spiders have if they're rare. 3 mana 2/4 reach. When Thran Spider enters the battlefield, you and target opponent each create a tapped Power Stone token. All right, let's freaking go. You can pay 7 mana to look at the top 4 cards of your library. You may reveal an artifact card from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So it helps pay for its own ability, but it's 7 mana. That's like screams limited, right?
Yep. Obviously, you want to put this in a deck where you're using Power Stones tokens to their fullest, and it's just not clear yet what that looks like. I really think that you can probably do better for 10 total mana than an Impulse for an artifact.
Yeah.
But you do you.
Right. I mean, it doesn't say sorcery speed, so let's get that instant speed Impulse 7 mana going. Let's go.
Great.
All right. Let's move on to the card that breaks the entire game of Pioneer. The Stonebrain. I think I just all right. Podcast is over. See ya. All right, anyway, the Stonebrain, 2 mana legendary artifact. It's a rare. 2 mana and tap it. Exile the Stonebrain. Of course it exiles, why wouldn't it? Choose a card name. Search target opponent's graveyard, hand, and library for up to 4 cards with that name and exile them. That player shuffles, then draws a card for each card exiled from their hand this way. Activate only as a sorcery. I think I just threw up in my mouth. Go ahead, talk about this card, because I don't want to.
Sure. So you and I tend to disagree about just how good this effect can be. I think this effect is generally pretty bad, the Unmoored Ego, Necromentia kind of thing, because it's just straight card disadvantage. That said, this is probably the best such effect we've seen. You can actually hit basic lands with this effect if you want as well. So you can try to mill out your opponent that way. It's a win con if you can repeat it over and over again. And that means that I think it's basically only playable either in like really old formats where Surgical Extraction sees play, like maybe Legacy wants this card somewhere. I'm not an expert in that format. Or if you have Karn the Great Creator. Stop me if you've heard that before.
Karn all right, stop.
Can fetch. Okay. Great, you got it. Karn fetches this card, you play it for 2, you tap it for 2, you recur it with Karn on the following turn, and you just keep exiling whatever card your opponent might be able to use to get back into the game from there.
I need to tell you one thing about this card, okay, Airball?
What's that?
You can use this multiple times a turn. Like so many times per turn with Mono Green, Devotion, and Pioneer. You use this, you tap it, you exile it, you get it back in the same turn. You have like the Chain Veil on, and then you do it again, and then you untap your Nykthos, and you use a bunch of mana, and then you get it back, and then you do it again. So like you just kill them, and they're just dead. They have no deck, right?
Sure. I mean that's true, but that's kind of like you're already totally winning in Pioneer if you're in that spot with the Chain Veil and stuff. Just because you already have the Pestilent Cauldron, which also
I mean you don't need the Cauldron anymore. You just play this.
Yeah, this is like marginally better, but you're still totally winning if you reach the point where you have the Chain Veil and the Kiora and the Nykthos, right? So this doesn't really make it any better. It just makes it a little faster. So the question is like, how much better is it in the situation where you don't have that complete setup?
Better than the Cauldron. When you don't have the complete setup, is better than the Cauldron. And it means you don't have to play
Yes.
the Cauldron, which means you open up your sideboard slot to another card.
Yeah, but you do have to play this.
Well,
So
right. But it's just a better card than Cauldron anyway. You don't have to play the random
Yes.
Overgrown 2 anymore.
yes.
So like
That is
it literally makes mono green strictly better, if not like just a little tad better. It's just still strictly better, right?
Yes. I think like it's not enough like as a win con with Nykthos and whatever. I think like it matters a lot how good this is in situations where the game is like even and you haven't even assembled most of your combo yet.
That's true. All right. There's not much more to say about that card. Let's move on to the next one, Transmigrant's Crown. 2 mana artifact equipment. Equipped creature gets +2/+0. Whenever equipped creature dies, draw a card. Equip 2 colorless mana or 1 black mana. So this is a card that we were in Magic 30 and we were going over the people that created this card, and they were like, this is exactly Skullclamp before it was made Skullclamp. They're like, let me make Skullclamp a little bit worse because we think we need to nerf it, and let's put -1 on the toughness. And that just made it infinitely better. So this was actually Skullclamp before it was the Skullclamp we know today. So how do you evaluate Transmigrant's Crown?
I heard people call it dull clamp.
Dull clamp.
At Summit, and I think that's pretty much exactly what it is. It's skull clamp at home, and it's way worse.
Yeah, you have to actually like have a sacrifice outlet with Transmigrant's Crown for it to be like on par with Skull Clamp, but it draws you 1 card instead of 2. Is there an application in like a constructed deck that you see this? Like Rakdos Sacrifice or something? Like maybe it's still not.
I don't think it makes the cut even there.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe Rakdos Sacrifice with Karn in it. I don't know. To get this out of the board.
Great. Sure.
I guess you can strap it onto something for 1 black and then sacrifice it with Witch's Oven and draw a card. But I mean, I guess you're already drawing cards with Corvold anyway, so what does it matter? I don't know.
The Rakdos Sac deck does not really have a problem with card advantage. And there are better ways to do it than this.
Yeah, for sure. All right, let's move on to the cards that make up the meld: Phyrexian Dragon Engine and Mightstone and Weakstone. And these will be the last artifacts that we cover before we get to the lands, which will take about 2 seconds. All right, Phyrexian Dragon Engine is a 3 mana 2/2 artifact creature Phyrexian Dragon. This is the Mishra part of it. Double strike. When Phyrexian Dragon Engine enters the battlefield from your graveyard, you may discard your hand. If you do, draw 3 cards. It has Unearth for 5, 3 and double red. This is the main reason why I think this is so easy to meld. Because you can discard this card with a blood token from Bloodtide Harvest or Fable the Mirrorbreaker, discard this card, and then cast your Mishra on turn 4, and then turn 5, just hit your untap land drop and bring this back out of the graveyard, and voila, you have melded a Mishra into winning the game with the 9/9.
Yeah, I like it. It does have a graveyard trespasser problem, so you have to make sure it actually stays in your graveyard for that amount of time, and you have to make sure it does get to attack. So it's still a 5 mana hasty 2/2 until you get to attack with it. But I do like this card. I think that it will be fairly easy to flip to meld it with Mishra.
This also gives me like, what's it called, Ox of Agonis vibes, to where like you have 0 cards in your hand, you bring this back out of your graveyard, draw up to 3. It's like a refill your hand type card, and that's a very good card to have. It's also a 3 mana 2/2 double striker, which is also not the worst card in the world, because you actively want to block with this to put it in the graveyard to unearth it again. So you get a really good trade out of it. People are not playing Graveyard Trespasser as much anymore because they're playing Phyrexian Fleshgorger instead, the 3 mana 3/3 Menace Lifelinker. So they are going away from Graveyard Trespasser for some reason, which opens the door for this Phyrexian Dragon Engine. All right, moving on to the Mightstone and Weakstone. This is a 5 mana legendary artifact Power Stone, but if you remember, back when we talked about Urza, it makes your artifacts cost 1 less. So you can go Urza into turn 4, Mightstone and Weakstone. This, when it enters the battlefield, choose 1, draw 2 cards, or target creature gets -5/-5 until end of turn, and then you can tap it to add 2 colorless mana, and it can't be spent to cast an artifact spell. So it's basically a power stone. So you can use this to kill a Shieldred, and then use it to play your untapped land on the following turn to meld the Urza. So you could turn 3 Urza, turn 4 Mightstone Weakstone, turn 5 untapped land, meld Urza. It should be that easy, but as you said before, probably not that easy. But it does draw 2 cards and does kill Shieldred.
Yeah, 5 mana kill Shieldred is probably not where you want to be, even if it leaves a mana rock in play. Drawing 2 cards means it can never really be too bad, but it's a mana accelerant that comes down on turn 5. So you really need to have the nut draw with Urza into this and then meld on the following turn, and just pray that your opponent never interacts with it. This card is not inspiring to me.
All right, we will see. I have gotten my Shieldred kill with my Son of Ixon, didn't feel very good. But anyway, moving on to the lands. Number one, we'll talk about Fortified Beachhead, which is the best one out of all of them. It is the Soldier land, as it's a blue-white land that comes in untapped. So this is a Hallowed Fountain that you don't have to pay 2 life for. As Fortified Beachhead enters the battlefield, you may reveal a soldier card from your hand. Fortified Beachhead enters the battlefield tapped unless you reveal a soldier card this way, or you control a soldier, which is always newsflash. You can tap it to add blue or white. You can pay 5 mana and tap it to have soldiers you control get +1/+1 till end of turn. So not only is it a actual dual land, but you can also buff your team with it. Like, what were they thinking with this land?
Yeah, this card is very good. It's basically never going to come in untapped, or it's never going to come in tapped early because you would never keep a hand that didn't have a soldier in it. So it's going to be an untapped dual land in the early turns of the game, which is exactly what the aggro decks need.
So this is literal Tundra.
It's not literal Tundra.
Like in standard, like you're never going to have a hand without a soldier if you're playing soldiers. So it is Tundra, like with upside.
Yeah, I mean, if you're playing like literal soldier tribal and you don't have any important creatures in your deck that are not soldiers, I think there'll probably be some corner cases where this land will not come in untapped and it will make you unhappy. But otherwise, you're right. Like, the card is very good.
All right, moving on to the next one, Hall of Tagzin. It's a colorless land. It adds colorless mana. You can pay 1 and tap it to add a mana of any color. So it's a filter land for like 1 extra, I guess. And you can pay 4 and tap it to make a attached Power Stone token. I mean, this is a rare land. I mean, at least it doesn't come in tapped like lands I've seen in the past.
Yeah, the card sucks.
Yeah, like, whatever. Yeah.
It's for limited. It's fixing. Yeah, it's
all right. Moving on to the next one, Blast Zone. It's a reprint. This is a cool art of Blast Zone if you're watching this from YouTube. Blast Zone enters the battlefield with a charge counter on it. Tap to add colorless mana. You can pay XX and tap it to put X charge counters on Blast Zone. You can pay 3 mana and tap it to sacrifice Blast Zone. Destroy each non-land permanent with mana value equal to the number of charge counters on Blast Zone. So you're going to be playing this in an artifact-based deck or a deck that can handle playing a colorless land, and then you are going to try to destroy your opponent's cards with it. For the people that have not played with or against Blast Zone, talk to them about it a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, Blast Zone is an important removal spell. It's a land-based removal that is not easily countered by any of the spells in the format. It's flexible. You can control this, like the CMC of the cards that will get destroyed by it. And when you have Power Stones or like other mana accelerants, like it used to see play with Wilderness Reclamation back when Nexus of Fate was a thing, you can arrange Blast Zone so that it destroys mostly your opponent's permanents and not your own. And it's also just a board wipe. It gets around things like Ward. It gets around things like counter spells. It's a solid utility land that I'm excited is back.
All right, yeah, very, very good card. Next up, before we just get out of here, we have two more lands to talk about that are not just the dual lands. Argoth, Sanctum of Nature. It enters the battlefield tapped unless you control a legendary green creature, which like maybe never, like maybe you'll get it in untapped at some point. It taps to add green mana, and you can pay 2 and 2 green for 4 mana. Tap it, make a 2/2 green bear creature token, then mill 3 cards. Activate only as a sorcery, and it does. This is the land that melds with Titania, Voice of Gaia. If you don't know about that one, listen to our previous podcast where we go over all of the monocolored cards, and Titania is one of them. So we won't spend too much time talking about that, but this does make bears and it does meld. What do you think about this card, Argoth, Sanctum of Nature?
It's a sad card that you sigh and play if you need it for Titania to flip. Like, if Titania ends up being good, then you play this card begrudgingly, but otherwise it's just a much, much worse forest. I don't think the tap ability is ever going to happen.
I mean, you don't have to sacrifice this card to make the bear, so you can just like keep doing it every turn and milling 3 with Titania. Like, Titania wants to have lands in the graveyard, so I mean, it just keeps doing it. And as a land that keeps making 2/2s, I think it's pretty strong, but it is going to make you very sad when it comes in tapped, and it's almost always going to come in tapped. All right, moving on to a land that is similar to, I guess, what's the 2/2 that has all creature types? Once again, I'm forgetting a very iconic card. Mutavault.
Mutavault?
Thank you.
Yeah.
I remembered it. Okay, you got to give that to me. Kind of like Mutavault, Mishra's Foundry. It's you're not going to give it to me? Okay, I remembered it. No. You can tap it to add colorless mana, and then you can pay 2 mana to have Mishra's Foundry become a 2/2 assembly worker artifact creature until end of turn. It's still a land, and you can pay 1 and tap it to have target attacking assembly worker get +2/+2 till end of turn. So this is, if you don't know what Blinkmoth Nexus is, I actually remembered the card. Blinkmoth Nexus is very similar to this. It's a 1/1 flyer and also can make your other Blinkmoth Nexuses powered up by +1/+1. This one is very similar to Mutavault in that it's a 2/2. It does cost 1 extra mana to use this, but it is a very powerful land. It's also an artifact. So, I mean, are you going to be playing Mishra's Foundry? It's like, it's a very good land to play in just any monocolor deck. So I can see this being played as like a 3 or 4 of in every monocolored aggro deck.
It's like weird because you can't attack with it and tap it to pump on the same turn, so you need multiple assembly workers attacking for this to for the second ability to matter. But it's a creature land in a format that doesn't have any. Like it's gonna see play.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's very valuable to have in Standard. All right, moving on, we're going to talk about the last lands, and we completed the set of dual lands, of the Pain lands. We have Brushland, green-white. We have Underground River, blue-black to play your Moby blue-black control deck. We have Llanowar Wastes as a black-green land, and a Battlefield Forge as a red-white land. We've needed these. It made mana bases much better, and now you can basically play whatever Pain lands you want in your 3-color or 2-color decks. There's not much to talk about these, but the fact that you no longer have to play certain colors because they lack the Pain lands.
Yeah, I think actually the only one of these lands that I'm excited to see is Battlefield Forge. I think that there is probably a very exciting Boros aggro deck that has just been held down by like crappy mana for the last several sets in Standard. And finally, you have an untapped duel that comes down early in the game, and you can start playing whatever 1-drop red creature, 1-drop white creature you have in your opening hand. It'll make those decks way more consistent, and I think it's a big boon to aggro in the format.
Right, I agree. All right, that concludes the episode. I hope you liked all of the Brothers War set reviews and the second part of it. If you didn't finish the first part, go ahead and look it up. But thank you so much to everyone for listening, and especially to those who made it this far. Make sure to give us a follow to see our next episode. Subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. Follow us on Twitter @NutsandBoltsPod, and we will see you in the top 8.